everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. And in this episode, we're going to cover the essential self-work tools that we think are really important for these uncertain times we're in. So we're going to talk about 3 specific areas. We're going to talk about mindset. This is kind of like the top-down approach. Like, what are we focusing on? We're going to talk about the importance of psychological, somatic work, what that means. And then we're going to talk about the spiritual connection to essence, and how this is all related to supporting us through these kind of just crazy transformative times. But before we get into that, just a few more spots are open for Embodied Soul Awakening, our flagship 12-week group coaching program with myself and Bernhard. We launch on Monday, which is going to be the 25th. That's going to be the pre-work. So we have a few spots available. We're going to go in way more depth into many of the things that we go into the podcast and way more in our 12-week group coaching program. And we find that, it's one thing to do self-work on your own, but it really bumps it up to another level to do it in a group of people. So if you really want some support and a structure and a guided container and coaching from Bernhard and I, we're taking a few more people in, and you can go and apply at www.thetimeoftransition.com. So it's thetimeoftransition.com.
All right, so let's dive into it, giving you guys some essential self-work tools for uncertain times. And these are uncertain times indeed, so I really want to talk about this a little bit at first, because we need to strike a balance here, as its saying goes, we have to face reality as it is, not as we like, want, or hope it to be. So there needs to be a reality check in a sense. But on the other side of the coin, without getting into, paranoid fear projections, doom and gloom scenarios, getting black-pilled, nihilistic, depressive, and all of that. So we're in tough times, right? With everything that's happening. They announced another variant, that's supposedly monkeypox and all of that. We have an economic quote-unquote meltdown, the recession, the inflation, printing money out of nowhere. That's really affecting people, not only in the US, but all over the world. Your fiat money is getting more and more worthless, so to speak. So a lot of people are struggling. We want to really acknowledge that on many different levels, not only physically, financially. Relationships are going through a lot. There are relationship struggles, loneliness, with this whole splitting of humanity, with everything happening with the woke and the COVID and all of that, the vaccine propaganda and all of that included. So that just creates a lot of friction, a lot of isolation, a lot of stuff comes up for a lot of people. So it can be extremely overwhelming, traumatizing, and just a lot to live through right now. And these are uncertain times. So this is not about, it's not about either way. It's not about hopium, nor is it about, fear, paranoia, and all of that. But facing reality as it is, understanding the bigger lesson that all these are lessons. And again, I have to say it over and over again, there is also opportunity in all of that. As I mentioned before, with everything that's happening right now in the world as well, there's a paradox. It has also triggered an quote-unquote awakening impulse in many, many people. Yes, many other people have dove more into delusion and, buying the Kool-Aid, so to speak. So there's a splitting of humanity. There won't be a collective awakening anytime soon. But it has triggered an awakening, has forced many of us to face ourselves, take a deep look into the mirror. It forces us to focus on what truly matters, and therein lies an opportunity, but work needs to be done, inner and outer work.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that people realize that what goes on your screen, on your computer, on the internet, on social media is not quite real life. I get how it affects people's real life, but I think that people tend to almost hook into this collective chaos, this fear, this constant polarization, constant drama that's going on the internet. And then what they do is they overlay what they're seeing online into their real life. And that's not helping anyone. I know for myself too, I have to take a step away from social media and really orient and become present to actually what is going on in my reality right now and not getting so hooked into the information and then like almost like following these streams of consciousness that put me into like a fear-based mindset. And I'm not saying this as like a new age pass, like there's obviously a lot of like people who are going to be in poor health and even dying because of the mandates and, the whole medical tyranny we're dealing with. So we are dealing with some pretty dark stuff, like, don't get me wrong. However, there is an immense divide and conquer agenda, which is also being fueled through our emotional energy. And we have to be really mindful on where we're giving our energy away and how that's affecting our state of consciousness in everyday life.
Yes, exactly. Very good point. Because, with it's a two-edged sword, with this information age we're in. We're more glued on the internet, Twitter, social media, Facebook, Telegram, and all these. We get information, YouTube or Rumble and all these alternative outlets. And it's important to get informed, but we can also easily get sucked into, and as Laura just said, and mistake that for reality, right? And while we need to be aware of what's happening in the world, so to speak, making the darkness conscious, we don't want to dwell on it. You don't want to get too sucked into it, become black-pilled. There's a lot of nonsense in the mainstream out there we need to question, and the gaslighting, the propaganda. But having said that, there is a lot of nonsense in the so-called conspiracy world and so-called truth movement out there as well. I've been in this, again, like digging down the rabbit hole for the past 20 years, and there's, so many dead and so much nonsense. People can get lost in it and literally lose it, become psychotic with all these the fear projections into the future, right? So a lot of people dealing with a lot feelings of anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, frustration, and the temptation is always to externalize it, blame it, and all of that.
And on top of it, I might add that many people are getting stuck on, meaning stuck in high states of activation, anxiety. That's where the racing thoughts come from. Or they're getting stuck on off. So they're getting depressed, low energy, feeling unmotivated. And both of these are signs that you are basically stuck in a trauma response. So we have to start to also even psychoeducate ourselves on the symptoms of trauma, pay attention to the state of our own body, our nervous system. And we'll go into that a bit later, because I'm noticing more and more, especially people who are like really kind of like online and just constantly posting conspiracy stuff and just what's going to happen kind of stuff. And they're really orientated towards, them and their agenda, not to say that there isn't one, but they're almost like in this hyper fixated trauma response on like what's going wrong, what's the next thing.
That's a good point.
And I'm noticing quite a few people spiral down that, and I have to say for myself, we just came out through a pretty intense group program, lots of death, lots of grief that people are dealing with, and you're going to have to anchor some sort of higher force, which you're going to get into the last part of this podcast, in order to survive these times. And I really mean that, because that's what helps me, is that if I get hooked into the matrix collective fear frequency, I'm only going to spiral down into a trauma response eventually. So we have to be really mindful that, if you want to talk about awakening, then there's an opportunity right now to use the chaos, to use the crisis, to really become more anti-fragile and learn how to contact our true nature, the part of us that never dies regardless.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are almost getting trapped in like the matrix or samsara, and they're just spiraling. And I'm noticing when I see, just witness how people are being, and even in the world or whatever, maybe not so much in Arizona, but I'm noticing a lot of people even being hyper fixated in this like trauma response. What's going to go wrong? What's next? And
Yes.
It's like their mental health is not doing so well. So you really got to prioritize yourself if you're getting kind of caught in the information and like just taking in stuff that's making you feel even worse, because that's, if you want my opinion on like the ultimate like matrix kind of controller's plan, is to mass traumatize us.
Yes. And also keep us distracted with the shadows on the wall, as I said many times. And yeah, I've written about it over the past 20 years, about the agenda for multidimensional levels. We post about it on Telegram here and there. But at some point, the overall agenda, you don't want to get too fixated on it. because the awakening is not going to happen by just sharing information online.
Exactly.
Right? I'm sorry. I mean, if that would be the case, we would have been enlightened already years ago. So this is not, it's not, you will also never, ever truly figure out the quote matrix intellectually, because it itself, it's a mind program. It works through you, through us. It's not out there externally. So, while, as I said before, we need to be aware objectively, but don't feed it. Make the darkness conscious, but don't dwell on it. Ultimately, we need to create something new. We need to step in our creative power. And that's what I mean with the opportunity. Also in your own life, in your personal life, and for the world, to step in your creative potential, which was the topic of our last podcast, and really create something new, a new timeline. That's where we need to step into. And it's not going to happen just by external action alone. The inner work, the inner attitude, the inner life is so important. So with that being said, let's go into one of the first key areas. So we want to address, once again, we're going to go into mindset, psychological somatic work, and your spiritual connection, your essence. So mindset, speaking of what we just addressed, the ultimate question is also, what do you focus on? Where's your attention at? That's very, very important. This day and age, we get so easily distracted in this information overload, where everybody is suffering more and more from the short attention span epidemic, and ADHD, which is in itself a trauma response, actually, right?
Yes.
Not being able to hold attention, always being also unconsciously addicted to dopamine hits by scrolling down social media or jumping from information to information to kind of feed something within yourself.
Can I say something
Go
about
ahead.
that? That stems from the inability to also be in the present moment.
Yes, exactly.
And so usually we learn ADHD from being in a childhood environment where it wasn't safe to be present. There was just chaos or fighting or something going on. So we learn how to our attention or maybe we just grew up in a chaotic home. Like, it's interesting because most of the children I knew who were diagnosed with ADHD grew up in chaotic homes. And can you see, you put a child who's very pure in their essence in chaos, of course they're going to get ADHD because there's so much going on around them.
Exactly. So where's your attention at? Because what we're dealing with is also the attention economy. Everybody is out for your attention. We are in information warfare, and how the matrix works is also to kind of distract you with certain things, right? To get your attention. Even like we see this again in the so-called quote-unquote truth conspiracy movement, where people just dwell always on this next, psyop, on this agenda, this and back and forth, and it can sap your energy. So the question you may want to ask you as well is, what media and information are you consuming, right? It's also certain information can also pollute you in a way. And I'm not trying to pull a new age bypass of denying the dark and just looking at the light. No, we need to be very discerning. And also, how does this information serve you right in this very moment, right? For example, all these mass shootings happening, like at some point, okay, I know these are psyops. These are, socially engineered and all of that. I don't need to constantly look into it and dwell on it. Nothing's going to change about posting about it. So what information media are really consuming?
And I have to say, this is the best time to start learning some sort of practical skill that you can offer the world. Like,
Yes.
So this is a question of the Taurus North Node, which we're still in. So we're still in the South Node of the Moon is in Scorpio. The North Node of the Moon is in Taurus. And so collectively, this is about resources on either end of that polarity, And so you see the themes of like people are financially struggling, things are getting more expensive, inflation, etc. Okay, if that's the case, this is the best time to put your mind and energy off learning a new skill that can serve this new age that we're entering into, So we really have to understand that, the power is really within us. Of course, inflation is going to affect a lot of people, but the best thing that you can do is focus on something that will be a resource for you in the future, and use these times of struggle or whatever is going on with you to really build up some valuable skill that you can basically think can help this new era. It's so critical, because I noticed too, even with myself, I have to be very disciplined with the things that I learn and the courses I take on, the way that I educate myself. The discipline is really key. You have like the world in front of you in this age, you You can literally learn how to do anything with your computer right now. This is an amazing time we live in, and people waste it by scrolling through social media, by consuming information. And I would suggest, especially when Pluto enters Aquarius, become a creator, not a consumer.
Yes, very, very important. So therein lies the opportunity I was mentioning before as well. You need to take, don't get out of the victim consciousness. Yeah, anybody who's financially struggling, I know it can be tough, but it's an opportunity. Educate yourself, financial education. Again, like Laura said, there's so much quote unquote free education on YouTube and all of that. If you really want to learn a specific skill or something you already know inherently, but it requires your effort and work, nobody's going to do it for you. It requires risk and all of that. So you have to have a certain mindset, and especially the attention and the focus.
Yes.
Even like Laura said, I need to, every day it's my challenge to stay focused, to stay disciplined. Laura and I, we learn new skills every day. We take courses, work with coaches. I learn, I kind of sign up to a course of something I want to learn all the time. I keep educating myself in order to create more and more, right? It's learning and creating at the same time. But we need to take our lives in our own hands, and that takes self-responsibility and a certain anti-fragile mindset.
And will.
And will. The will is key. We need to engage the will. We have become we mentioned this before, I believe, in our past podcasts. People have become more consumers rather than creators.
Yeah.
But it takes work and effort, right? You cannot get around it. So it's also, there are many unconscious self-defeating mechanisms people have. Many of us, I've worked through them. That goes deep into psychological work, unconscious self-sabotage mechanisms, all of that even goes deep into spiritual work and beliefs we have around the world and all of that. So we need to really, really do a deep dive and honest dive within ourselves and make priorities. That's also very, very key, right? And ultimately also, despite the craziness out there, it's about having a healthy sense of optimism, seeing opportunity in any situation. And I don't mean blind faith in the sense of just a nude of just like contrived positivity, but healthy optimism, because there's an opportunity here right now.
And can I say, for many people, I can already hear their thoughts, or it's easier said than done. Because when you have a really strong inner critic, which is, again, a trauma response to try and keep you feel safe, then the trauma work will be really key. So if you're having trouble being optimistic, you feel depressed, negative, you're always just kind of complaining, this is also a symptom of depression and a symptom of trauma. So you got to work on your own, even just taking an information diet and working on your own mental and spiritual and emotional health would be good for you, because it's easy to be optimistic when you're taking care of yourself. Yes. Mentally, psychologically, physically, spiritually. It comes naturally. But for many people, they have a very strong inner critic. And the inner critic's main affect, emotion that it will put in you is shame. And shame, check out that podcast that we did. We did a whole amazing podcast about how to heal toxic shame. It's really, a lot of people got a lot out of that one, because if you, this is again kind of leading back to it, you need to understand the symptoms of trauma within you and how they manifest. And if you are in that trauma response, cutting yourself off from all this kind of fear and doom and gloom media that's going on out there, and just kind of creating a container around yourself so you can work on your own health should be your priority. Because as things amp up, who knows what's going to happen this winter, if you understand that the ultimate goal is to mass traumatize people, which I'm personally a little bit kind of mindful of happening, because Pluto in Aquarius could also symbolize mass trauma. That's a trauma signature. So they could turn up the volume on a lot of stuff. So we have to be able to basically kind of down regulate and deal with ourselves when we get these kind of breath of fresh airs and there's not major lockdowns or something, because they're going to try and do it again. I personally believe
it's already happening.
Yeah. So if you're in this constant negativity, spiraling, just constantly thinking negative thoughts, then you have to take care of yourself.
And keep in mind, the matrix forces, they also try to keep you head centric in a fear state, externally oriented, right? I see this kind of trap falling many quote unquote truth seekers, always outside blaming. And also, if you lack this inner work and take responsibility, if you have lacked the self-awareness to observe yourself, you always project externally. You keep yourself in like the victim state, so to speak, right? And give your life force away, basically. So it is about healthy optimism and also rejecting fear, right? That's the frequency they try to put us into. And hence, we need all these practices to engage in, because we all at Laura have the inner critic, the manager, and all of that relates to trauma, our own shadow, even other forces or cold forces feeding us. We never question where our thoughts come to begin with. But the key point for all this work, by the way, for any inner work on mindset, psychological, spiritual work, is self-awareness and self-observation, right? To study yourself, become curious about yourself, to not mechanically react or justify, rationalize, excuse. So mindset is a very, very important key. It ties into many other things. All is holistic, all is interrelated. That's in our course, again, we go deeper based on this fourfold approach to holistic self-work, because we need to work on all areas simultaneously, even like on the very basic how food, diet affects your brain and thinking, right? If you, that kind of already, if you lack of healthy fats, for example, seed oils and all of that can affect already your brain, can even result in depression and whatnot. Substance abuse, people nowadays, pot marijuana has become very like almost overrated in terms of quote unquote medicine, but there's also dangers to that. It keeps you also kind of checked out, can be abused in many ways, alcohol and all of that. So it is about really being very, very honest with yourself and stop lying to yourself.
Yeah. And generally speaking, like, let me just speak on the diet piece, because I find that sometimes people hyperfixate on that area, and to the point where it actually creates more fear and more paranoia in them, because they're like just totally militant about what they should and shouldn't eat. And from my experience, if you're already feeling not so great, then eating crap food, like going to get fast food or deep fried food or whatever, will usually make you feel worse. Typically, I'm just speaking from my own experience, So if you're feeling like tired and low energy or whatever, yeah, you got to work on your diet. But that could also be trauma, and we have to understand that the emotional, psychological, and spiritual will ultimately override any good diet. And I know that from my own personal experience, that I've had like a focused on diet first, really cleaning up my diet, thinking that it was just my diet that I needed to fix. And it didn't fix actually my symptoms of trauma. So like, we want to kind of nail our diet, but we also don't want to get into this weird obsessed, like health obsessed. Because I see people really go off the deep end in these days and be like, even I did a post about healing depression. And then one person was like, depression all has to do with diet. And I was like, okay, it's a factor for sure.
Part of,
but it's not, I would say it's like maybe like a 15% factor at best. So like, we want to also not, we want to eat foods that are nourishing, that feel good, that feel grounding for our body, that make us feel strong. But we also don't want to use diet as a way of getting in another paranoid mindset as well. Because ultimately, if you're psychologically, emotionally, spiritually healthy, you can actually go and eat at a restaurant every now and then. It's not going to do anything to you.
Yeah, you don't want to become neurotic about it. Exactly. Because there can also be a trauma response of being obsessed with the physical body and diet, and then it gets, you see a lot of people in the biohacking community, sometimes they're obsessed with the physical performance of their body, and it's actually very anti-spiritual. It's very obsession with the materialistic body.
So
right?
maybe
can be more damage than any good. So so that was mindset. So again, like, take care of your mindset. What do you focus on? What do you consume information-wise? What are your priorities? Where can you learn more? Be creative. Learn a new skill. Engage. All of that, be creative. So the second one, let's look into, obviously it relates to its psychological somatic work. Very, very important in this day and age. And number one that stands out, we have done recently a masterclass on that, and we go again way deep on this in our online course, is shadow work. Shadow work is the name of the game. I don't think we need to repeat it again. We have done a few episodes on this topic already, but really understanding what is shadow work, how to do it, why it's very important, being aware of your triggers and projections. It's very, very key. in this day and age, because what we're dealing with is a lot of psychic archetypal forces. What's happening externally is also an unconscious manifestation of the collective unconscious and even our personal unconscious. And the more we only see it externally, we just keep going round and round in the wheel of the matrix samsara.
Yeah, and then you see this with the polarization between the left and the right. They're both shadow projecting on each other, like intensely. And that's exactly what these kind of occult darker forces will feed off of. They just want this collective shadow projection going on. And it's happening on both sides. That's the issue, is like neither side is taking responsibility for it. So, our own piece is to catch our own negative projections towards others, use that as material to understand more about ourselves, more about the parts we've disowned, and then also the positive projections, which seem to be less these days, to be honest. But we just live in this era of like collective shadow projection. And even we were talking about this the other day, is like, we probably don't catch like 70 to 80% of our shadow projections. But if it's really emotionally charged and it's like above a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10 of your trigger towards someone or something, you can guarantee it's either a trauma response or your own shadow is being involved, And ultimately, the moment that you start to fixate on a trait in another person and make them into like all good or all bad, then you know that your shadow is also playing a part. So you see that actually out in the world, you see this immense splitting, like these are the evil people, these are the good people, you're either on this side or that side. This is that psychological splitting which creates a shadow projection. And it's like, you have to be way more interested in your responses to other people than what other people are doing or who you think they are. Because if you want to take it even further, every label that you attach to reality is ultimately a projection. It doesn't mean that they're like harmful. Like even when I project, so I can project onto a tree. I can look at a tree and be like, oh, that's a nice tree. I wonder what tree that is. Oh, I feel this way. Like every single perceptual layer that I attach to reality is a projection. So if you want to get really nuanced with it, you'll see that we literally are projecting all the time onto reality. We're putting our thoughts, our ideas, our emotions, our narrative onto certain things and saying, this is the way it is. And the moment that we do that, we actually step out of the greater field of awareness, this witness observer that we were just speaking about, and we forget ourselves. So, first you actually have to be able to work with your emotionally charged projections and be pretty skilled at doing that, and at least catching the more intensely charged ones. And then later on, if you really want to access this true field of like awareness before things like, the true state of awareness is free of projections, basically.
It's a higher state.
Yes, it's very, you'll get glimpses of it. You'll get glimpses of it when your mind is empty and you don't have thoughts. You get little wisps of it. It's always there. But a true awakening, you can stabilize that state. And then you just become less attached to the ideas that you have about things. You're just like, what I mean?
It ties in the trap of identification, because what Laura just mentioned, we see this a lot. We talk about the woke left, the hard left, the vehicle for a neo-Marxist communist agenda, and definitely infused by occult forces, anti-divine, and all of that. It's very disturbing. Having said that, what we see now and what we see happening is it's almost creating this knee-jerk reaction on the right.
Yes.
And this very like dogmatic Christian, might trigger some people here, dogmatic Christian revival, this Bible thumping, accepting Jesus as the savior, even from the New Age. People all of a sudden jump from New Age into like Bible thumping, dogmatic Christianity, literally the savior program.
You're born a sinner, you're going
and
to
all
hell.
of that. And it's all this Bible thumping is choosing one dogma to another. But it's also, ironically, it's also based, just like the woke left is coming from a moral superiority, judgmental place. Then the right with the religious Bible thumping is also coming from the superiority, moral,
yes.
higher, moral superiority, and also virtue signaling in their own way. That's the irony, two sides of the same coin. And that's essentially it's what I call the trap of identification, right? Like the true Christian teachings, which I've studied, which I also practice, esoteric Christianity, you don't need to go around preaching or telling people that you need to accept Jesus as your savior. You live with this deep, heart-centered approach of service and being that. embodying that Christ consciousness.
Yeah.
But what I want to also address on that token, we're not implying, the middle ground, it's almost a middle ground fallacy. This is not about, you can easily then morph this easily into this, non-duality approach, non-duality teaching, and we should just be neutral and not engage in anything. No. The non-duality state of mind, I think we have talked about, so it's an extreme higher level of being, almost enlightened state that can easily be abused by just an intellectual understanding, right?
Yeah,
in the sense of we really want to make this clear. This is not about like the middle ground fallacies, because it's always what we're trying to get is everything is way more nuanced and not that black and white. Does that make sense?
Well, basically, the way that I see it is that in order to get to that true state of awareness, you have to individuate.
Yes.
But then eventually, at a certain point of your individuation, like if you want to go by the evolutionary astrology framework, first stage individuation, you kind of just start trying things out and you're trying to break from the consensus, and you have one foot in one world, one foot in the other. Second stage individuation, you actually start to really hardcore rebel, and you're like throwing off all of the conditioning from society. And at that stage, people tend to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Meaning they just rebel for the sake of rebellion. They're like rebels without a cause. They're just like hardcore Aquarius kind of like, revolutionaries, like just total, even anarchy would fit into that. And the third stage individuation, you actually, you start to develop a real gift that's very unique that you can offer the world, and you bring it back to the consensus. So you're not battling the consensus anymore. It's almost like in second stage individuation, you're almost like trying to like desperately hold on to your individuality, and you're like, screw you, and you feel like you have to fight everyone for it. But then there's almost this softening, this like Neptunian orientation to third stage individuation, where you just allow yourself to be a unique individual and bring that back into the world. And then from the third stage individuation, you're going to move into spiritualization. And then that's an interesting jump as well, because it's almost like you kind of had this like hard won individuation. You focused on developing the small self, but then there's another sacrifice where you have to sacrifice that small self to the greater self, the greater reality that you are.
That is exactly what Shirabindu called the sacred sacrifice, right?
Yes.
Also the sacrifice, almost then the surrender to the divine, which is a later state comes.
Exactly.
And that ties into what Carl Jung said, right? We need to build a healthy ego and individuate itself. Even Shirabindu talked about this before you can engage into spiritualized deeper work and then give yourself completely to the greater self.
Yeah. So what I'm saying for people is like kind of like see where you are on that stage. Because at one point, especially that second stage of individuation, it actually is better for you to not hear the other side and kind of just focus on like, what do I believe? What do I think? Really focus on your individuation. But then once you reach to that kind of last final stage of individuation before spiritualization, you have to more open up to the wider reality. You can't get so fixated on your beliefs, what I think, you're bad and I'm right. There's a certain stage where that's even appropriate, so you can really discover yourself. But then eventually you're going to have to get rid of that and really look at things through a more holistic vision. And it's going to be hard. It's not easy.
Yeah, exactly. So psychological somatic work, we just mentioned shadow work. That's key. We've talked about it a lot. We go deeper again in our course. There's a lot of material on my website and our podcast. Understand it. Be aware of your triggers, projections. Be responsible. That takes a lot of work, a lot of psychic energy, a lot of awareness, a lot of humility, and it's not easy work. It's always more tempting to project and justify our projections and triggers. So what does it mean on a practical level, especially somatic? We want to approach it somatically. Soma meaning through the body, because I've seen so many people over the years, myself included, by the way, early on, that you can easily fool yourself you're doing the work by just intellectualizing it, but not embodying it, working through your body, because your body holds the shadow, unconscious material. Wherever you have tension, these are unprocessed emotions. There's emotions you suppress, you don't want to feel, or even experiences, your body holds it. I know that. I've worked as a professional body worker, massage therapist, and healer for over 20 years, had my own private practice. I've worked on thousands of people. Your body is your walking biography. Your body holds everything. So the work needs to be done through the body, which is your temple. The body has the wisdom to help you on this, to support you on this. But the key point is to get into your body.
And soul evolution Like the soul is experienced through emotion. So, that's what I tell people. I offer astrology readings in the course. We go into evolutionary astrology. And I must stress that if you're working with your deeper soul lessons, it has to be processed emotionally. That's the starting point. So you get an intellectual understanding of what you need to do, and then you need to live it through your emotions. You need to be fully immersed in your soul purpose with all the range of emotions that include it. And that's a really vulnerable way to live. And that's why most people do escape into the head and they do disassociate, because that feels safer for them.
Or they have the dogmatic approach to religion or spirituality. It becomes more intellectual. How can I say, Bible thumping or anything, without actually living it, embodying for example, the Christ consciousness.
Yeah, and I think, like a friend of ours recently commented that he thinks that reverting back to this old style Christianity is actually the primitive brain. It's a fight, flight, fearful response, and just needing to almost revert back to a more primitive way of being because they're terrified, It's
almost like a spiritual bypass in a sense.
Yeah, it's more like a trauma response, actually.
Right.
So it's like
a trauma response.
Yeah,
yes.
because they're just
in grasping
this primitive fear.
Give me some belief that makes me holds me on to that.
It's all root chakra stuff. Like, I'm scared to death about my death, so I need to grasp onto something that kind of confirms my fear. So we want to just watch out for that, because I do personally, if you look at the cycles that are coming up, Pluto in Aquarius is going to enter 2023. And then we're going to have 20 years of that, which is going to be wild. But then we are going to be probably, maybe not all of us, but some of us are going to be alive for Pluto and Pisces. And if we want to talk about an opportunity for collective awakening, I personally think it's going to come then. So we're priming ourselves right now. Like we're going to go through this together, and it's going to be a really exciting time to be alive. But we have to be able to recognize the signs of trauma. And we also have to be willing to individuate. And individuation begins with withdrawing your projections and owning your shadow material and integrating your personal unconscious. That's the basics.
Yeah. So, and then some other tips, again, somatically, engage in body mind practices. I've been doing this, Laura and I also, for 15, 20 years. The consistency is key. Do your Qigong, your yoga, get off the screen. Discipline is needed again, and the will. It's about the consistency. It's not one day for 2-3 hours, but every day a little bit. Working out, finding good weights is kind of seems to be very hyped. It's finding good, but they can also be easily used, as seen as a trauma response, to harden your muscles, to get out of body more, to build, to armor up your emotional body and all of that.
Yeah,
and strength is important. We need to work on that aspect as well. But I've seen this whole workout culture also being used as a trauma response, or the addiction with the physical body. Yeah,
and the problem with that is that the body armor creates even further emotional suppression.
Exactly.
So it's totally great to do some sort of physical activity every day. We go for a hike every day in nature. It's like one of the best times of the day for us. But if you tend to have trauma, emotional suppression, then working out can actually intensify the body armor and even intensify the almost like compression of the emotions in your body. And you're just like a walking time bomb, waiting to explode, Yeah. Like, I mean, people talk about roid rage, and it's partially due to the hormones they're taking. But to me, it's also like when I see someone who's like really kind of compressed and like, working out, I just see like just emotional suppression too. So, we got to kind of walk a fine line. And if you're more someone who tends towards emotional suppression and that you have trauma, then hardening your body is probably the worst thing that you can do. You need more stretching and letting the emotions flow.
For example, I can easily hold tension. So that's some questions for you guys out there. Ask you, again, all about self-observation. Tune into your body. Where do you feel tension in your body? Can you actually feel the tension? Maybe you feel numb in certain parts. Can you tune into it? Can you feel into it? Maybe there's some emotion behind. How does it feel? The texture, like the image that comes up. Really like observe yourself. And that's a key point. Can you also feel your feelings? Whatever comes up. Because most of you feel feelings, especially more quote-unquote negative ones, uncomfortable ones, and we try to escape them right away by distracting ourselves, avoidance strategies and all of that, addictions. But can you allow yourself to feel your feelings without judgment, without intellectual analysis, meaning without labeling them, anything, and also without trying to fix anything, just allowing yourself to feel the feeling.
Yeah,
that's already that alone is the hardest thing to do for most people, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's also, David Hawkins has this great practice in his book called Letting Go, where you just basically allow yourself to feel whatever it is you're feeling without trying to fix, change it, breathe into it, and let it go. And this should be, should is not like my favorite word, but it's a tool that I basically use pretty much throughout my day. Anytime I feel like a stuckness or a stickiness or a heaviness or whatever, like this emotional regulation is like an every moment of your life job. It's not just something you do for an hour a day. Like you need to be self-aware all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So that's some tips on psychological somatic work. Again, the importance to engage in this is because we want to make the darkness conscious, shadow work, the unconscious conscious. It all relates to trauma work. Why? Because any unconscious trauma we carry, or shadow aspects we're not aware of, can lead also to unconscious self-sabotage, right? We will keep ourselves in, never find the right partner or get into wrong, quote unquote, abusive relationships or lose a job or lose money and can create abundance and all of that. But all of that, the kingdom is within ourselves. So we need to do the work to work through the layers to ultimately then find our true self, our essence, which brings us to the third point, the spiritual connection and connection to essence. So were you going to want to touch upon this or go into that?
Yeah, let's just touch on this. So returning to essence is your essential nature, who you really are beyond all of the world's conditioning.
Yeah.
And it's really beautiful, because this is my favorite part of doing the course with people, because we can take them through a pretty intense program. It's definitely, an intensive. But then what I see happening with people is their essence returning to them. And like, I've seen this when people I'm coaching with too. It's like, that's how I know that the healing is happening. They just become more them. And all these like anxious, depressed, aggressive, fearful trauma responses start to soften, and their true nature starts to reveal itself. It's almost like their soul that you can kind of pierce through underneath the trauma, if you're more sensitive, starts to come more to the front. So that's what we're trying to do, is like recover the essential nature. That's why we do this kind of work. That's why we do in-depth psychological work, because we know that it kind of bridges the gap so that you can anchor these higher kind of spiritual energies within you.
Exactly.
So you're not trying to become a version of yourself that you think is the most enlightened version of yourself. You're just trying to become more you.
Yes.
And like, do you think that like Adyashanti is like pretending to be some sort of spiritual person? No, he's just being himself. That's why people like him.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do. That's the whole point, is like not to get some sort of spiritual egoic identity and like, I'm this 8D Lemurian princess or whatever, you know what I mean? Like people dress up they create these new identities and labels for themselves, but the most beautiful and soul-based expression of yourself, that's the goal, is so that you can just become more you and become just better at doing that. And that's where your strength, your beauty, all of your gifts and your talents lie. So that's the whole point.
That reminds me, like, there's this whole, I don't want to get into the right now, but you reminded me, there's this whole new age revival of people speaking about 5D and all of that.
Yes.
They're just throwing that around. That's a whole other story, the whole new age, delusion. But let's dive deep into that now. We're at the end of the first hour. In the second hour, really dive deep into the spiritual connection, how to connect to essence, what spiritual work truly entails. And you're right, it needs to happen both together. That's really the core of our work as well, really fusing psychological work with spiritual work to bring those two areas together. And it's not either or, but both together. And I want to finish the first hour with a quote by A.H. Alma's, teacher whose work I really appreciate, his diamond approach. And learned a lot from him. And he made an excellent quote about suffering and essence. And that's really the core aspect what it comes down to, why many of us people suffer. It's more psychological suffering, inner suffering, almost quote unquote unnecessary suffering. So he writes, Suffering always arises when you're out of contact with essence. You know, essence is the true self, your true essence, as opposed to the personality you identify with, all the different parts you have as well. Or seeking something other than essence. If you value anything, husbands, wives, children, girlfriends, parents, jobs, money, sports, cars, anything at all over what is true in you, there is suffering. Automatically, that movement outwards, seeking satisfaction from external reality, wounds you. It is a wound to your heart. It is not that the factors of our external lives or our human desires are antithetical to our work, the great inner work. Like everything else, they can be respected and understood for what they are. But if they come before essence, there will be suffering, pain, frustration, and anger. Now, you can also substitute essence. You can talk about God, the divine, anything that becomes before you, God, before the divine, your relationship to divine is the most important and needs to come before anything else. That's the deeper meaning of what's written in what Jesus said, that seek the kingdom within first, right? Have this connection to essence first and foremost, to God, to the divine, not some dogmatic God out in the sky. This many people in religious fever project human qualities on this bearded guy in the sky. No, your essence within, your divine within, your truth within the divine, that kingdom within. Once you have connected that connection more and more, everything else will be given to you. That's really the deeper meaning of all of it. And that's why we do the work we're doing. But we have to remove all the layers. We got to engage in the sincere inner work, in our shadow work, in trauma, to remove all of that that's in the way of essence, and then really clear our vessel to embody the divine force, to connect to essence, our true being. And the essence of our true being is also true joy for being alive, for being this embodied Gnostic being that doesn't depend on anything externally. And that's really what we're working on, or our aim is, so to speak. So again, depending when you listen to this podcast, we still have a few spots left for our 12-week group coaching program, Embodied Soul Awakenings, that starts July 25th. You can apply at thattimeoftransition.com. And now in the second hour, we go deeper into the spiritual work, esoteric work. I also want to talk about decision-making process. There's a lot of people have fear of making quote-unquote bad decisions now. So we want to talk about this. Ties into intuition, even hostile forces, how they interfere with our decision-making process and all of that. We'll talk more about this in the second hour. If you're not a member already, you can sign up at my website, veilofreality.com, to get access to all the second hours and also to support our work. We appreciate you very much, and see you all in the second hour. Thank you.